Welcome everyone to the last video in our Intro to Permaculture webinar. Today we're going to talk about goals. As you've watched these other videos, I'd really like you to think about how we're really following the permaculture principle of patterns to details. So we're starting with the big picture and working on down to the details of each and every person's site, which really only they know. So now that we've set you up to have a grounding in reality and to really know what's going on around you, the next thing we'd like to do is talk about setting goals.
Even before you know where to start with goal setting, it's good to have some of the underpinnings of what permaculture is about so you can understand what the possibilities might be and what the limitations are. So we want to be able to pick up with that new understanding and a sense of what has been done or how to go about it and start to figure things out that are practical for ourselves. And this is where goals really comes in.
I definitely think that understanding the context that you're working in helps you set effective and realistic goals.
And that's what we're talking about, effective and realistic, right? If we're not grounded in reality and what's going on around us, it's something that can even be dangerous if we're not really paying attention.
Yeah, or something that you end up paying for over and over and over again, right? One of those type 1 errors that happen in design.
You stole the words right out of my mouth. It's that type 1 error thing, indeed.
So you've come to this point in the course, hopefully that stimulated a lot of ideas about what is possible for you. And goal articulation is one of the first steps, but a lot of people say it's observation. But what you bring to the design process in terms of goals and vision is also the other half of that, really, initial piece. And so finding out what is your vision, like how long do you plan to be on this property that you're working to design, or what is it that you bring to the system for yourself or a system in a community? Bill Mollison kind of famously said, take responsibility now. And it's like, well, how do you like to do that? What is your intention? And so that is the really important piece here, is what is it that you bring? What is it, your preferences? What is it that you like here? Because if you don't like a particular food, then maybe that's not the one to grow in your system. So just knowing yourself, knowing what your vision is, and using that to inform the goals is a good place to be.
Definitely. And just to back up what you're saying, goal setting absolutely comes first. I know that you were saying some people will push observation first, but I think goals come before anything else because you have to put yourself into the design. You have to be a part of what's going on. It has to feed you in some way. Otherwise, it's not getting done.
Mm-hmm. And maybe that does start with observing yourself, inner tracking.
Sure.
There's definitely this tension between your vision and what exists now. And the goals are a way to kind of move us towards that vision. But I think also it's important to recognize that a vision is not a goal. Those are two different things. The goal will move us directionally towards a vision, but there's going to be many steps to get to maybe a closer view of that vision, or you may never quite get there, but always moving towards it.
Yeah, and that towards is the really important piece here, because design is an emergent process. So as soon as you get to one point in affecting the strategy and implementing goals, the vision might change just a little bit, and that will stimulate new goals. So it is important to be as clear as possible when you start, and then track it as you're going along.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And as hard as it is to do it for yourself, the other piece of this is that we're rarely acting 100% on our own in making all of the decisions and on our own vision. There's usually other stakeholders involved, whether that's a partner or family members or community members. And so it's really important to talk about and try and find the common place in everybody's vision so that your goals are collaborative.
I would even argue that we're also working with the vision, in quotes, of the trees and of the plants around us and of the squirrels that live in those trees. And if we can kind of harmonize our goals with all of those things, that would definitely be an ideal. So then if our goals work against maybe what the squirrels want, then we're going to have an infestation of squirrels and not be able to grow produce or, whatever might happen.
To me, this points to the fact that both visions and goals are dynamic, and they're a moving target. They're going to be changing based on the information that's coming in. They're always going to be moving. So I think it's an error to get fixated on a goal as a fixed thing and just focusing toward that, regardless of the information. They're always going to be evolving in real time.
And this is one of those places where learning about design process or working with a designer can really, really help people, because they have enough experience and enough insight into the planning and strategy and process portions of this that they can help clarify questions or give feedback on things that will support your process. So working with a designer is a really good idea, and setting up SMART goals. So
big fan of SMART goals. When we talk about goals, it's easy to get a bit grandiose or focused on the wrong part of the design. I think that it's important to use SMART goals, and that's our acronym that means specific, which is to say it's not very general. It's actually something that you can look at. It's achievable and definable. Measurable, meaning that you can actually go back and look at it and see whether you achieved it based on specific criteria. Achievable, meaning you can do it. It's not world peace or something that is a little bit too broad, too over the top. Relevant, meaning that it's specific to the design. And then time bound, meaning that there's a duration to it and you can go back and assess on these 5 different metrics.
Note the difference between a goal and a vision. So when we're talking about SMART, we're talking about the goals, the steps along the way, and making sure that they're actually real steps that we can take is kind of what SMART is aiming at.
Yeah, the thing that's bringing to mind for me is that often it's that smallest change that we can make for the greatest effect that comes out of Mollison, that we want to set these grandiose things that are way out of our budgets and would be amazing, but the simple thing is often the best. It's not that we can't have some grandiose, it's that we just don't need to overwhelm ourselves with it.
Indeed.
Yeah, leverage points. So speaking of leverage points, there's a lot there, and we're barely going to scratch the surface. When we talk about leverage points, we're talking about things that give more of a result than the effort they took to make them. The more leverage we have, the more we can do with less work, which is great. So the point I wanted to make with this slide was that the lowest leverage is just doing more of something. Adding more is the least effective way to really make a change. More plants, more money, whatever. And really encourage you to think about the paradigms, because that has the most effect. But they're also very hard to break away from. Ideas that the way that we live, ideas of the way that we get around and operate in the world. Changing those can really make a big difference.
And I think this entire concept speaks to what Rhonda was just talking about.
Yeah, the way we think can limit us the most. And a lot of that comes from deprogramming the way society has taught us to think about a particular thing, and just really starting to question and be aware of what is going on and find the things that aren't working. And that usually would point us to something where the paradigm shift will serve us well. So it just helps us be smarter about the energy we're using, the kinds of commitments and investments we're making.
This is that minimum effort for maximum change that you were just talking about.
Yeah. Cool. And I think that kind of takes us right into limiting factors too, because when we have an awareness of what the limiting factors are, it makes us get savvy about what we can do and how we can sort of stack functions. So that's something we haven't really talked about, but that's helpful.
I find that being aware of the limiting factors, it gives me the thing to address. If water is your limiting factor, then more sun or less sun, those aren't going to change things. Less sun might. If water is the limiting factor, then more sun's actually going to make things worse.
This is where I'm forever coming back to something that you said, Milton, the idea that when you're in a city, for example, so many decisions have been made for you. And so these limiting factors are already in place, and you're trying to identify what those are and work within them. That's what good design really is having a full view of what your limiting factors are and getting creative within that framework.
And often the limiting factors really do spur us on when you start to address those. They spur the creativity to make a change.
Absolutely.
So something I want everyone to think about as they're making their goals, a way to test them. And test them, is this goal actually permaculture? For the most part, I think if we're talking about bettering ourselves, it's going to be pretty permaculture. But
people can come up with goals that aren't necessarily moving us toward permanent culture or permanent agriculture that still feel pretty good to them in the moment. Right? We can fantasize about a lot and have goals for a lot and even recognize limiting factors, but we could be working toward something that isn't good for people in the future.
Yeah, so what I propose is a way to check your goals with a simple ethics test. Does it take care of the earth? Does it take care of people? And does it take care of the future?
I mean, that's a central piece of permaculture design.
Absolutely. The things that I kind of have sorrow about is that we're not even there. So much of what's around us just already fails this absolute simple test of the ethics 99% of the time, because hurts people, is imperialist, is, whatever. It doesn't meet the ethics. So it's not that the ethics become completely useless. It's that we have to be a little bit more sensitive about how we apply them. And so I came up with the complex ethics test, where essentially you're scoring things from 1 to 10. You can see that it's easiest then to compare different goals and say, well, this goal is better than this goal because I see that it really cares for the people and cares for the earth, but the future, not at all. But this other goal cares for all three. Maybe I should go with that one. It's a way to operate in an imperfect world.
In Holmgren's own words, these are not intrinsically actionable. They're aspirational, ultimately, and it's what we're pushing towards. So we're always trying to underpin our decisions around this framework. This is what separates us from so many other disciplines, but nonetheless, it is at the heart of everything that we do.
Mm-hmm. And there's been a fourth ethic proposed of transition aware. So earth care, people care, and fair share, or future care. And I think transition aware. And it's just one of those things of, it would be very easy to say, well, my goals are better than your goals, and so I'm a superior person. But that's not really a helpful attitude. So transition aware helps us just recognize none of us, as Milton was saying, are leading the perfect life. And so we need to just be aware of where we are and how we can set some goals, take a deep breath, keep making better choices going forward and move toward them.
And ultimately meeting people where they are.
Mm-hmm. So what are some examples of goals?
The first one is actually from Larry Santoyo, that I think it's just such a reasonable thing to ask. What's something that you can do for under $100 in less than 10 hours of work? That makes it a smart goal in a lot of ways.
Yeah, because it's really doable. And you could do one of those and do another one and do another one and do another one.
Work incrementally.
There's a danger in that, though, from a design perspective.
Of course, you have to start with a full design, and then you can work incrementally, but there's got to be a design in place.
Well, and that's the vision, right? That design is the vision, but don't mistake the vision for the goals. And don't mistake the vision for a destination. Another option for setting a goal might be to think about what's something that you set it up and it continually does its job to make your life better just by being there. That might be, insulating, taking the time to really craft some good insulating blinds for your house. Might really make a difference in the long term in terms of saving money, and then that enables you to have more than $100 to spend on your next goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great synergistic way to build energy and engagement in what you're doing.
Relish the small victories.
Mm-hmm.
Second example is thinking about an urban situation. And that was a situation that I lived in. And I would actually still say, while I'm not hyper urban, I'm still very much in an urban situation in Ann Arbor. But when I lived in Chicago, I lived in an apartment and I really didn't have direct access to land. So thinking about the spaces that you do have access to, how can you interact with the parks around you? And building relationships, I think, both with people in that park or with organizations around. They may have space that, hey, you could put in a few currant bushes in front of this building. Nobody'd ever have a problem with it, and we'd love to have currants. And then there's your opportunity right there. Also educating yourself, I think, is a really good move. Learning how to identify different kinds of plants, learning how to forage was great. Is kind of what my focus was in the city. And then also, when it's time to move again, to really consider what your new requirements are and use that as criteria for when you relocate.
Mm-hmm.
There are abundant opportunities in the urban context from people that already have a yard or land that you can share with them in return for a certain amount of produce. There's rooftops. There's working vertically. There are all kinds of opportunities if you just look.
Mm-hmm. So a very common thing is that there are multiple stakeholders, no matter where you are, whether you're in an urban environment or rural environment, if you're going in on a project with other people. So it's not uncommon for me as a designer to work with a married couple or partners and to have people, I'll start talking to one partner and they'll say, I want all of this. And I'll talk to the other partner and they want half a dozen more things that the other partner didn't necessarily prioritize. So it's really, really important when we're setting goals to just be able to reconcile those, to find win-win solutions, because a lot of times what happens is that you find synergies. For example, I have a new client where one of them wants a pond and the other one wants a sauna. Those two things could go together really well if it's designed well. And so we can work with that with a sauna, pond / natural swimming pool / greenhouse system that can be really exciting for them over the years ahead of them in that place, right? So it's just really important to be able to share that and to get people on the same page and get everything out so that it gives the design process the most complete, most full expression of who these people are in this place.
This is definitely where your people skills come to bear, because part of the job is being psychologist and therapist to the people that you're working with and getting in there and finding what's at the heart of them and finding a way to synthesize these things and make them functional in a way that everyone feels ownership, feels included in the design, and actually feels very driven by the vision. That takes some doing. It does take a lot of work, but when you can really nail it and get in there and connect on that level with everyone, the design's always going to be more functional because they'll take control of it and be in the design, interacting with the system once it's completed. And that's the difference between a design that goes on to last year's and something that just looks great on the date of implementation and then doesn't get used after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes it requires some patience. Like usually if I'm working with design clients, and especially if they're doing their own implementation, it might take a few years of them living into the design to see why recommendations or things that are tense between people need to resolve in one way or the other. So just having patience with each other too, remembering that things are iterative.
Definitely.
I would even suggest, and maybe a little bit more of a fringe idea, she said, the squirrel says, that if you're just designing for her, the squirrel might come and mess it all up. You're thinking about the world around you and what it's going to try to do and how you can incorporate that into your plans is certainly useful.
I think you're always tempering this against your Earth Care piece, yes?
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed this entire series, gotten to know a little bit more about us. Certainly, we are always cooking up new and interesting ideas and ways to talk about permaculture, help facilitate education and understanding for people, encourage good design. So we would encourage you to stay in touch, check out our course listings,
Sign up for our mailing list.
Share what's exciting with us, give us feedback. That's an important part of any system. And, we hope to see you at a course sometime in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks for coming on this journey with us.